Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about some of the questions I get by people who are frustrated with my Big Five strength standards and people who don't really grasp what they mean. And this is one of these topics I'm going to touch on a lot because it is, one of the fundamental topics of my channel, and it's that I have a Big Five strength standard which states, and again, you guys can't cherry pick this. You can't pick apart single lines from it. You can't pick apart single lines from it. You have to take the rule in its entirety, and it's that the overwhelming majority of reasonably healthy young men, right there's your first line, there's your qualifier, who if they reach all five of these following lifts, all five, doesn't say four, it says five, that they will generally look like they're big and like they lift and will have reasonable body composition when walking down the street. That the average person will look at them and be able to say, hey, that guy lifts. That guy's pretty big. That guy's pretty jacked. And you'll look like you lift, and people won't necessarily just think that you're some fat guy, and they won't think that you're some guy who only trains arms or something like that. They'll be able to look at you top to bottom and think that you lift. And those five lifts are, and again, I want to state, as I state repeatedly, it's all five. I don't care if you can only do one. In fact, if you can only do one and you look like you lift, you're probably on a lot of drugs. You actually have to reach all five, and they are a 200-pound standing press, a 300-pound bench, and I do mean a bench press. I don't mean a bounce bench. I don't mean your ass coming up in the air. I mean an actual bench press, a 400 squat, 500 deadlift, I don't even state what type, and our body composition control, and again, arm size, 100-pound dead hang pull up or chin up. Now, when I state that, there's always confusion of how many reps. If you can deadlift 500 pounds, that means you can do it at least one time, right? If you can do more than one, that's great, but that's all I state. You can lift it. Either you can lift a weight or you can't, right? If you can do 500 for 37 reps, you can deadlift at least 500. You qualify. If you can deadlift at least 550, that's at least 500 pounds. So therefore, you qualify, right? That's not complicated. I don't know why people want to overcomplicate that, but let's get over to the point. People will say, well, I'm frustrated. I've been working at it and I can't hit those lifts. What am I doing wrong? Do I need to get fatter? What do I need to do? Because like I had a guy the other day say, hey, I'm 6 foot tall, about 170 pounds. I don't know my body fat, but am I going to have to bulk up? I feel like I'm a really long way from reaching these goals. And it's kind of like, you've got to look at it and go, well, it's 6 foot tall and 170 pounds. How much muscle do you think you're carrying? And that's what people need to understand. You know what? Genetics will affect how fast you gain muscle. Genetics will affect your starting point, right? I mean, I hope everyone's aware of that. I do hope most people understand that some people can gain muscle at twice the rate as someone else on the same program. It does happen. Even if all other factors are evil, they're doing the exact same workout. You know what? Genetics do affect muscle gains. You know what? Some people start with more muscle mass than others, right? That's very clear. You see people walking around right now who don't lift weights, and some of them have more muscle than others, right? Take a random cross-section of people that you know, 20 random guys you know your age. Some of them have more muscle than others, even if they don't work out, right? It's pretty obvious. So your starting point, your genetics will affect the rate at which you progress. But the point is, it takes time to build muscle. You have to build muscle. And realistically speaking, unless you are just absolutely shredded, 170 pounds, if you're at a normal body fat, and I don't mean average American body fat, I mean if you're at a normal healthy body fat, let's say 15%, that's considered the middle of the healthy range, right? For a healthy young man, 15% body fat. If you're 15% body fat at 170 pounds at 6 foot tall, in terms of muscle gains, you are very much a novice. You haven't put on that much muscle on your body yet. Maybe get up to 185. Because a 6 foot tall guy who bulks up of just gaining muscle until he's 185, that's within your natural limits easily. Like at an average body fat, you don't even have to go up to 20% body fat for that. Come on, 6 foot tall guy. But here's the caveat: it takes time to build muscle. And my strength standards are because when you do not use anabolics, you cannot separate size and strength. There is an enormous, and I mean an absolutely enormous overlap. Well, that's why I give those strength standards and say you're going to look like you're jacked. You're going to look like you're jacked. To the average person, we're not talking about to bodybuilders or the weird degenerate bodybuilding subculture and its own ideas. I'm talking about when you're just walking down the street. If you can hit all 5 of those lifts, you're probably not going to look fat. Now, if you're fat and you can hit those lifts, you are brutally strong, because the chin up and the pull up is going to really limit you. Like a guy who's carrying an extra 50 pounds of body fat who can do a 100-pound pull up, that's a strong dude. So there are, again, exceptions to my rule. Just like there are guys who are going to be 5'1" who say, I think that your standards are just too high. I'm at 5'1", I'm never going to bench 300 pounds unless I get super fat. Well, you guys are all the odd men out, because fat guys who can do 100-pound chin-ups are very, very rare, even in the lifting world, right? And 5'1" guys who can get to a 300 bench are relatively rare in the lifting world. But we're not talking about these outliers. So when I give this general rule, it's a rule of thumb. That means this is going to apply to probably 90% of you listening. 90% of you, this is the rule. If you happen to be one of that 10% who can look really jacked to the average person without reaching those, hey, you're genetically gifted. You're probably just very lean naturally. You probably have wider than average shoulders. You have really good muscle insertions. You're in the top 2 or 3%, 5% genetically in terms of body composition and stuff. Hey, be happy. But to someone with average genetics, they're not going to look like you do at a lower strength. So the point is, a lot of people need to understand this takes time. And here's what I would ask to anyone out there who says, hey, I'm struggling to reach these standards. Well, how long and how consistently have you worked at it? If you come and tell me, well, I did a bro split for my first 2 years and goofed off, and I only leg work I did was some leg presses once a week. Well, you're not going to hit those standards in a year unless, again, you're very genetically gifted in terms of strength gains. Right? If you don't do pull-ups and you don't do overhead pressing, and benching is the only lift that you did out of those big 5 with any degree of consistency, your first 2 years, you probably missed some of your novice adaptation phase. Right? You missed a lot of your noob gains. You're going to have a little bit tougher of a battle to fight. But, if that's where you're at and you start working towards these goals, and, you're starting with a 200-pound squat, and you're starting with a 225-pound deadlift, and you can only overhead press 105 pounds, and you bust your ass for the next year trying to reach this goal, well, that's just not going to cut it. Let's be realistic here. If you take a rank novice of average genetics and average height, and you give them my goals here that I set, if they train correctly and eat correctly, you're looking at 3-4 years. You're talking about the guys who are genetically lackluster as far as gaining muscle and strength. You're looking at 5 years. You're looking at 6 years. It's obtainable unless you fall into, again, that 10% of people who will never reach these goals. Okay, there's some people just genetically are that bad. And that's okay. It still applies to 90% of you. This is what numbers you will probably need to hit to where when you are walking down the street, the average person who just sees you randomly is going to know immediately that you lift and that you're going to look fairly big top to bottom. Right? That's what it states. Well, again, back to the point, how many of you out there think that the overwhelming majority of people who don't use drugs are just going to come train hard for 6 months and they're going to look like they're jacked to the average person while walking down the street? All right, that's just not going to happen for most of you. You're going to actually have to put in some work. It's going to take time. Building muscle takes time. When you're no longer a novice lifter, gaining 6 or 7 pounds of muscle is like a 1-year goal. Like if you're an intermediate, for you to put on another 6 pounds, 7 pounds of muscle will probably take you the better part of a year. So, you're looking at that and saying, okay, well, you've been training hard for 6 months and now the gains are slowing down and you weigh 170. You weigh 170 pounds, at 6 foot tall. You need to put on another 10 pounds of muscle is what you need to do. Well, that might take you another year and a half. That's what you're doing wrong. You just haven't worked at it long enough and consistently enough. For the average Joe who's not genetically gifted, who isn't going to put any pharmaceutical substances into their body to help, that's a fairly lofty long-term goal to hit that Big 5 strength standard. It's going to take you a while. You're not going to just start training and be there in 6 months. That's just not reality. It's going to take consistency. It's going to take consistent work and good training and getting plenty of protein and all of those things for, a few years maybe. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.